Hello, today's lecture is mainly a review of everything. We're going to have a test on Wednesday. Tomorrow we're going to review the vessels a little bit, but other than that, that is going to be the extent of what the test is going to cover. So I want to first go over your Google Doc assignment that I gave you on Friday. So you can correct those on your own if you have them in front of you. From the right atrium, blood flows through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. Number 2, then it flows through the pulmonary semilunar valve to the pulmonary trunk. Number 3, then it splits into the right and left pulmonary arteries on the way to the lungs. Remember, arteries away. Then in the lungs, carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out of the red blood cells and oxygen is going to diffuse in. They're both moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Then the oxygenated blood travels through the pulmonary veins back to the heart. And the left atrium is going to receive the blood coming through those pulmonary veins. The mitral or bicuspid valve is going to open, allowing blood to flow into the pumping chamber, which is the left ventricle. The aortic semilunar valve is pushed open when the ventricles contract. The aorta branches into systemic arteries, and they connect to the arterioles, which connect to the capillaries of the body tissues, and that's where oxygen is going to diffuse into the tissues and carbon dioxide is going to diffuse out and go into those capillaries. The systemic veins return the blood to the inferior and the superior vena cava, which are the largest veins in the body, and those enter into the right atrium of the heart. And that is it for the return. On Friday, I went through this with you, correcting this part. So this is showing a capillary bed serving the head and the upper limbs. These are looking at the pulmonary circulation, so looking at blood exchange in the lungs itself. The pulmonary pump, what is bringing that blood to the lungs is the right atrium. The systemic pump that's pumping to all the rest of the systems in your body is the left, I said left, right atrium, I meant right ventricle. For this one, for pulmonary pump, the systemic pump is the left ventricle, pumping to the rest of the body. The vessels that are serving the organs of the body are found here. So the oxygenated blood is going to come to them and the deoxygenated blood is going to return. And the vessels down here are, this is representing your trunk and your lower limbs. And I wanted to go through this as well. Where am I? Sorry. So the order, number 1, the inferior and superior vena cava are where we start. That goes into the right atrium. The right atrium the blood then goes through the tricuspid valve. That will lead into the right ventricle. Then when the heart contracts, the blood goes through the pulmonary semilunar valve, into the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs, returning to the right or left atria through the pulmonary veins. Now we're in the left atrium. Then we will go through the bicuspid or mitral valve into the left ventricle. When the left ventricle contracts, the blood will be pushed through the aortic semilunar valve, through to the aorta, and then to the capillaries of all of the tissues of the body. So those were your answers to your worksheet. And now I just want to review, kind of tie it all together in a picture format. So the circulatory system is also called the cardiovascular system, and it's comprised of the heart, which is the pumping of the blood, and the arteries that are going to deliver the blood to the body tissues, and then the veins, which are going to carry the blood back to the heart. So the role of the arteries is to deliver carbon dioxide to the body. The role of the veins are to return deoxygenated blood to the heart. The heart is surrounded by a pericardium. So the pericardium is a sac of fluid, which we talked about before. Its role is to decrease friction. The way that it is constructed is that we have a fibrous connective tissue that holds the heart in place and provides some strength to that fluid being surrounded. The parietal layer of that is going to be the side that is open to where the serous fluid is in that membrane. And then the heart layer, the epicardium is the surface of the heart, and then we have a visceral layer which secretes the serous fluid. So we're going to have fluid in between that will provide lubrication, because as the heart pumps, you don't want it to blister as it's rubbing against other things in your body, other structures. The muscle itself, the myocardium, not only does it have cardiac muscle cells which are capable of contracting, but it also has connective tissue which provides kind of a collagen framework for the heart, and that supports the muscle. And then on the inside, well, the epicardium is the layer on the outside. We end up having coronary vessels that we looked at that go throughout, but they also venture deep into the cardiac muscle, the myocardium, to feed it oxygen and to remove the carbon dioxide. And then the endocardium is the layer that is exposed to the walls, to the chambers inside the ventricle and inside the atrium. It also is the same construction as the blood vessels and the valves. So all of those are made of endocardium. Endo means in. So looking at the flow of the heart, of the blood within the heart, we want to start with the deoxygenated blood entering the superior and the inferior vena cava. So that's here and here. And then it's going to dump into the right atria. The right atria is receiving blood from those, and it also receives blood from the coronary sinus, which is draining all the coronary veins. So we get deoxygenated blood from the actual heart myocardium dumping in here. Then that is going to go through the tricuspid valve. They call it an AV valve for atrioventricular. The chordae tendineae are pulling on that valve to prevent it from, it says regurgitation, from going backwards, from turning inside out and ending up here and not closing off that chamber. And the way that they're held in place are by these papillary muscles that keep the tendons tight. So the blood is going to only be able to go one way, and it's going to flow in to the pulmonary artery because the pulmonary semilunar valve is going to open. So add semilunar to here. It's just opened by pressure, and I explained to you before that when the heart relaxes, those cups fill up with blood and block the opening. So the pulmonary arteries are taking them to the right and left lung. In the pulmonary artery, we have arterioles, they're showing up here, that are going smaller and smaller. Actually, this was showing the alveoli and the bronchioles. So the bronchioles are going to branch into these terminal bronchioles, and then you have the alveoli, or alveolus is singular, at the very bottom. So air is in here, and then the capillaries are going to come by so close that the carbon dioxide is going to be able to diffuse out of those capillaries and the oxygen is going to diffuse in. Then from the lungs, that oxygenated blood is now going to come back through the pulmonary veins. So it's leaving through the pulmonary arteries, coming back through the pulmonary veins. Then, now we are in the left atria. The left atria is separated from the left ventricle by the atrioventricular valve called the mitral valve or bicuspid. When that valve opens, then we are going to get blood flowing into our left ventricle. And the same process, the chordae, tendonae, and the papillary muscles prevent that valve from going backwards and allowing blood to flow back into the atria. So this is showing kind of the overall picture of what's going on with the systemic circulation. So once the valves close, now the aortic semilunar valve is going to open as this heart muscle contracts. Blood is going to go up through the aorta. It's going to branch out into smaller and smaller arterioles and end in those capillary beds all over the body. In those capillary beds, oxygen is going to diffuse out and go into the tissues, and the waste product of metabolism of breaking down the glucose for ATP is carbon dioxide. That is going to diffuse back in. The capillaries are connected to smaller veins, are larger than capillaries, are the venules. The venules dump into larger vessels called veins, and then the veins are going to join up into the inferior and the superior vena cava, and we will start all over again. So that's the systemic circulation. So one thing that happens because of the difference between the pulmonary circulation, where the pulmonary circulation is just going to the lungs and back, very short distance, very little resistance, because there isn't a lot of friction with the multitude of vessels like there is in the body. In the body, if you think about it, every single vessel is going to provide some resistance and cause friction, which is going to slow down the blood. So in order to get it back to the heart efficiently, the muscle of the left ventricle is 3 times as thick as the right ventricle. And so it can give us a stronger punch and return that blood. The other thing that this one is new information for you. This is just what causes the sound of our heartbeat, the lub-dub, lub-dub. The lub-dub is caused by the closing of the valves. So the first lub is the closing of the AV valves, the atrioventricular valves, the tricuspid on the right side and the bicuspid on the left side. That happens when the ventricle is squeezing, so when the heart is contracting. So systole is contraction, and that's going to be the highest pressure. So when it's contracting, these valves have to close because otherwise we get backflow going into the atria. So that's the lub. Then when the heart relaxes and the chambers are refilling, then the relaxation causes blood to start flowing backwards because of gravity, and they're going to come against these semilunar valves and close those. So when the heart's relaxing and the blood is starting to go back down because of gravity, the dub is the closing of those 2 valves, the semilunar valves, the pulmonary semilunar and the aortic semilunar valve. Tomorrow we're going to talk just about the vessels real briefly, but basically arteries are designed to withstand really high pressure because they are receiving blood when that forceful contraction of the left ventricle happens. Valves are receiving low pressure blood because the blood has slowed down when it went through the capillaries, and there's been a lot of friction there and a lot of spreading out. And so when it comes there, it's got less oomph. So the way that the blood is returned, because it's a complete circuit, it's going to be returned because of the heart. But one of the things that happens to help the veins return the blood without it pooling in your shoes is that we have valves. So the valves are one-way valves. They press up when the heart relaxes. When the blood comes down, it'll shut the valve, kind of like the semilunar valves do. So up, pressure relaxes, they shut. So that's it for today's lesson.